because the nudes in it were causing such an outcry. So she continues to be a much discussed and I think very important character in Chinese modern art, and I would say in feminist art in general. I'm going to read from two sections of my novel. The first section is taking place when she is at the Shanghai Art Academy, studying under Liu Haisu. She ran into some trouble initially while she was there because while her coloration and her technical skills were outstanding, she had a large amount of trouble initially painting nude bodies, which I think, given her background, is sort of fascinating. And the fact that she ended up overcoming this and making sort of the traditional impressionistic nude sort of the basis of her art, I think is a tremendous statement of her determination and her strength. And part of what I was trying to do in this section was understand how that came about, how she was able to conquer these insecurities and sort of the scars of her past to paint such beautiful nude paintings. So. A week later, Yulong still hasn't been to a class, but she is at least finally working. Inspired or shamed by Liu Haisu, she's racked her brain and her contacts and finally found a model to meet her requirements. It took nerve, determination, and 2 mortifying refusals, but when the solution came, it seemed at once both pure genius and sheer insanity. She started that very same afternoon. Now she chews a cuticle, studying her subject. "I'm supposed to live in you," she tells the girl. "That's what Teacher Hong has said." Her model stares back balefully. Goosebumps sprinkle her bare thighs. Yulong rubs her own arms. It is chilly. The dorm that she's moved into, both because it's close to school and because it allows her to avoid Chi Hua and Ah Ying, those are 2 other people from her household, while she works, prohibits charcoal braziers. For good reason. Last year, more than 30 girls in a similar dorm had died in a midnight fire, pounding on a door, bolted to keep them safe. Setting her teeth, Yulong mixes her flesh tones, violet, yellow, earth red, vine black, Venetian red. She creates a quick and expert outline of the body's shape on her canvas, and then she loads her brush and begins to fill it in. As she works, she doesn't let herself think or question. She just paints, stolidly, methodically, modeling in the peach-tinged curves, the beige shadows. When she reaches the breast, she hears Godmother's voice, that was the madame from the brothel. If they touch the breasts directly, charge 7 extra, 10 for the feet. "Hush, you old bitch," she mutters and moves on to the hips, the belly, the puckered kiss of the navel. She is just backing up to fill up some hair some more when the clamor erupts outside. A funeral is in progress on the street. At first, Yulong tries to work through it, but it's no use. The mood is broken. She sets her brush in her jar and throws on her shawl against the cold. Walking to her desk, she uncorks the wine that she's taken to sipping as she works. She pours a glass, and then she walks to the open window. The coffin is set just outside the house across the street. The deceased must have died away from home. But there is no shortage of mourners. The daughters are dressed in black, grandchildren and great-grandchildren in blue. The son-in-laws wear stark white and bright yellow. Underscoring this colorful chorus of bereavement is the clicking of the pat cha dice. The mourning gong hung to the right of the house's doorway signifies that the departed is a woman. The presence of great-grandchildren means that she was probably quite old. But Yulong is too far away to make out the portrait that's propped on a stool by the coffin, amid layers of flowers and other offerings. She tries to recall the grandmothers who greet her sometimes when she comes home. One has a face like a withered pumpkin and a sweet and oddly young voice. She sometimes calls out to Yulong, "Going to school, little daughter? When are you going to paint my picture?" Yulong imagines this same woman now, lying still in her coffin with her face and her body covered by yellow and blue cloth. What would it be like to paint that in life study, a body that has no life in it at all? Her anatomy class works from textbooks and an old medical skeleton donated by the Mission Clinic because it's missing 2 ribs. But Leonardo is said to have learned from the actual dead, spending hours in darkened morgues, dissecting, peeling back, sketching. Her classmates, raised to see death as the ultimate contaminant, were openly horrified by this. Yulong, though, had merely shrugged, at least inwardly. She couldn't help but think that if the Italian master had simply taken up the flesh trade, he'd have gained just as firm a sense of human physiology. Now she studies her model again, the hardened nipples, the goosebump skin, and the sight of her like that, stripped alone, hurts her heart. Yulang shuts her eyes and then berates herself in silence. Stupid whore. You can't paint her if you can't see her. And then, just like that, it hits her. I can't see her. Electrified, she opens her eyes, Teacher Hong's words coming back with a new meaning. Try to see the skin as more than simply skin, he had said. As advice, it is directly and fully at odds with that Jinling once gave her. It's just skin. And yet, studying her model again now, Yulang suddenly realizes that her troubles, then and now, arise from her own failure to see skin as either more or less of itself, to see it outside of a spectrum of pain. In her old life, it was a liability, a soft surface waiting for wounds. As such, at the academy, it inspires not creative passion, but a wave of remembered revulsion. And in both places, she's been unable, as hard as she might try, to see it as beautiful, as something worth painting. Outside, the mourners wail, "Aye, come back, mother, come back." Her heart racing, Yulang shuts her eyes once more. She thinks of Jinling, that was her mentor at the brothel, not in death as she was the last time that Yulang saw her, but in those impossibly early days when Yulang had first begun to attend to her, before she fully understood a body's worth in monetary terms and could value it only in the currency of beauty. She thinks of the way that Jinling's skin had looked in the early morning, sheened in perspiration, stretched out in sheer joy, limned in the early light of a sunrise. Beauty, she thinks, and she looks again into the mirror. And perhaps it's the timing. The sun is finally setting, touching everything in the room with orange and gold. But at that moment, Mirror Girl strikes her as almost ethereal, as far from mere skin as a rainbow is from rain. Yulang stares at herself, her thin thighs, her curving hip, and for the first time in years, she truly sees herself. She sees herself as finally free of the broker's probing fingers, of strange men's hands, of the jewelry that binds it debt-like, a chain-like to debt. Picking up her palette, she hurriedly paints out the stiff first image. She cocks her head, takes a breath, and starts anew. She paints until the light outside has seeped away into the black sky, until the monks go home and the mourners leave, and all that's left is the soft click of the gambler's ivory. The next section that I'm going to read is going to take place in Paris. In her early days, I was trying to imagine how she ended up as a free student at the Beaux-Arts and what her interactions with Zhu Beihong, who was a notoriously flamboyant young man in Paris at that point, must have been like. And this scene is sort of what I came up with. In it, she is meeting him for the first time. She's asked him for some advice and some help because she wants to stay on in France. At this point, most of her scholarship money has been cut off, as it was for many Chinese students. There were many, many Chinese students studying in Europe at this point, but as the country became more enmeshed in civil war, the Republican government began to cut those funds, and so many of them were just left penniless. Zhu Beihong is nearly a full hour late for their appointment the next day, but he makes no pretense of an apology. Instead, in a regal motion that's oddly in keeping with his red velvet coat, he waves down a passing waiter. He requests a café noisette for himself and adds half of a pitcher of milk to the coffee. He plunks in several sugar cubes. Observing him, Yulang notes his soft chin and his full lips, both at odds with a broad, strong nose. Jinling, she thinks, would have liked this man's face. She would have said that his nose predicted strength in finance, his lips and chin a weakness for pleasure, a fortuitous combination at the hall. So, the artist says, sipping his milky beverage, you want to study here, but your letter implies complications. These explain it better than I could. Yulang removes the other two notes that she had stored in her novel on Tolstoy. One is her curt Beaux-Arts rejection notice, and the other is even curter, a communique from the Anhui government notifying her that both her scholarships have been withdrawn. The young artist scans first one, then the other. Yulang settles back to study Parisian cafe culture, something that on her last brief trip here she had no time for. It is indeed a far cry from Lyon. As she watches, a man dressed in a harlequin costume prances past, delivering a note to a girl who is sitting across the room. The girl reads it and blows a languid kiss to the note's sender. She is dressed in what looks like a man's military uniform, her poodle tucked like a purse beneath one arm. Between its golden hair clips and monkeyed fur-trimmed little sweater, the dog is decidedly better dressed than its owner, or, Yulang thinks dryly, herself. You were with the new Sino-French Institute, Zhu Beihong is asking. Yulang forces her attention back to the table. Just for 6 months before I transferred to the Art Academy in Lyon. Long enough to tire of grammar drills and endless lessons on table manners, I'd assume. He drums his fingers. Were you there for the demonstrations? Sorry, I should mention this too. There was a contingency of Chinese students at Lyon University that actually took over the university in, I believe, 1918, right after Yulang would have gotten there. They were demanding that the school create space for them because it had essentially promised that it would, and then it did not. So sort of the early stirrings of political activism. And many of these demonstrators went back to join the revolution, the communist revolution in China. You participated? Zhu asks now. No, but I supported them, and as he lifts an eyebrow, they were in the right. The Chinese consul told them he'd guarantee their admission. Well, from what I've read, that's not his story now. Yulang sets her cup down. Then he's a coward and a liar. Her companion looks amused. Shouldn't you be careful? For all you know, he might have friends here in this cafe. Well, if he does, they're not friends of mine. Still, Yulang casts another glance around. The dark young woman is now feeding her poodle almond pastry, shredding it with gold-painted fingertips before pushing the bits between the dog's black gums. Do you ever honey your words? Zhu Beihong is asking, reaching again for the sugar. Well, I did it one time, but I've learned that you can't paint with honey. He smiles, a slow, warm grin that seems to illuminate the air around him. Bravo, you'll do well here, mademoiselle. Madame, Yulang corrects him. That's right, he says, without interest. Patting his pockets, he pulls out a tarnished cigarette case. This stuff about the consul, he says, flicking a gawa into his mouth and putting the case back without offering it to her. You heard it directly? Yulang nods. A friend of mine from the academy came to Lyon from the Montargis faction, and he said he'd been lied to. They all did. I believed them. She laughs, remembering, although at that point I barely believed I was in France yet. And this friend, he was one of the radicals. He was a student, like me, or anyone else. Yulang had been going to say like you, but even though the young artist graduated from the Beaux-Arts just last year, she senses that he'd bridle at the suggestion that they're contemporaries. Zhu Beihong has, after all, already shown in 2 salons. He's a protege of the realist Dagnon Bouverie. It's just that the government had taken away his stipend, she continues, his job. He worked in an auto factory there, paid less than a living wage, let alone for schooling. It left no time to study in any case. She stares into her coffee. It's excellent, cleanly bitter, far stronger than the black-tinged brew that she's allowed herself since her funds were cut off. It's hard for us all, Zhu Beihong is saying, sipping his sugared sludge. We didn't come here like rich Americans to drink and eat and dance Le Charleston all night. He nods towards a table of them, speaking loudly in their twanging Yankee voices. We have to make our own way. We have to work. He was trying to get into a course that would let him both live and study, Yulang protests, and he failed. The system failed him. It failed all of us. Yulang eyes him evenly. It's clear that he is bored now by this subject. She picks another which she expects he will like more. Is it true that you've been accepted into the next salon? Predictably, the artist's frown inverts into a small, smug smile. 4 paintings so far, and 5 more that they're deliberating on. He leans back expansively. But I want to hear more of you. How did you manage to transfer to the Lyon Beaux-Arts so quickly? Principal Lu Haisu had helped to set up the arrangement. He had an acquaintance there. Lu Haisu. Zhu pronounces the name as though it rings a distant bell, and Yulang suppresses a small smile. In Shanghai, Zhu Beihong and Lu Haisu are now almost famous as rivals, as Picasso and Matisse are here in Europe. It's even said that when Lu Haisu started his Heavenly Horse Painting Society in Shanghai, Zhu Beihong counter-launched his own painting society here, the Heavenly Dog Society, so named because dogs eat horses. Having met Zhu Beihong, Yulang